Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Hodinkee Radio. Excited for this episode. We're hopping across the pond to the UK for two guests, two of my favorite people in the watch industry, if I'm being honest. First of all, Dr. Rebecca Struthers. Rebecca, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And I've got a friend of yours, a friend of mine as well, Lewis Heath, who you all know surely as the founder of On AnOrdain. Lewis, how are you doing today?
Very well, thanks, Tony. Thank you for having us.
Lewis, let's start with you. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in my study in Glasgow, in my flat, for various reasons. The studios are very busy. We're in transitioning at the moment from, and it's full of boxes, and there's no, so I'd have people coming in and interrupting. So I thought this was better.
Well, we're going to get into this, but this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about because we connected probably 6 months ago and you were talking about the new space that you were opening in Glasgow. So we're going to get to the state of On AnOrdain in a bit here. But Rebecca, it looks like you're calling in from perhaps your workshop or your studio. We've got all kinds of gadgets and gizmos over both of your shoulders. Tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, so we're in our workshop in Leek at the moment in Staffordshire, which is near the Peak District, if anyone knows that. So about an hour and a half north on the train from London. Very pretty part of the world. So yeah, this is our workshop, all our old tools and machines, and I'm glad I've seen your cat as well now. So if anyone hears dog noises in the background, we've got Archie, our resident watchdog, is in the workshop. So apologies in advance.
And you moved, how long has it been since you've been in that workshop? You moved, what, a couple of years ago now?
It was a year ago in January.
Okay.
So we were in Birmingham before this, and London before that. So we moved a few times, yeah, but just over a year and loving it.
Whenever we've got a watchmaker in their studio or in their workshop, I should say, we have to ask for you to show us something cool on your desk. So maybe take a moment, pick up something you've got around you and tell us a little bit about it.
Can I get up? So I'm not at my workbench at the moment. I'm
yeah. While you get up, Lewis and I will chat for just a second.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot, Tony, a little bit. Have a look at this. Because I put this on today, so I thought I'd wear something that wasn't mine. Do you know what this is? Because I see that. It's terrible light, isn't it? There you go.
For those who aren't watching on the YouTube, some sort of cushion watch. It's got like a regulator style layout, but I don't think it's a chronograph. I think it's just like the hours at the top and then the date window is down below.
Partially. It's Debay and a long word that I can't pronounce. They invented the split-second chronograph. Apparently, these two people. Rebecca, you might know. So I'm not really testing. I just can't pronounce the second name, but it's a lovely little thing, and I put it on today. And the typography. This is from the mid-90s.
Yeah,
and it's enamel with just lovely little numbers. Yeah, I found it in a little shop in Switzerland, and it was very fun. But I've never heard anyone never read anything about them in kind of the media or anything.
So Swiss-made watch from the 1990s?
Yeah, by two significant inventors, according to Wikipedia. But that's all I know. I can't pronounce the second name because I can't quite read it on the watch, and I've got terrible memory. But it's lovely. It's gold with enamel dial and really fun numbers on it. So,
well, Lewis came to play. Rebecca, what about you?
Well, I've just retrieved a Swiss-made watch from the 1790s, which is a bit before that, which is I got one of my Dutch forgeries. So this is what I cover them in my book as well. And I ended up writing a PhD on them. I found them so fascinating. But yeah, so this is a forgery of a London-made watch. You can just about see. It's by a maker called Tarts London, but it was actually made in Switzerland in a Dutch style, which I found such a weird contradiction in itself that, yeah, I'd researched them for about 13 years and still collect data on them. They're fascinating, but yeah, actually, it's probably earlier than 1790s. It's probably more like 1770s, 1780s. And this is the first one I bought myself, like a complete piece as well. So special to me.
why was it this one? I mean, as you mentioned, you've been talking about these for years. They're in your book. You did an HSNY talk about them as well. That kind of, I imagine, was like the culmination of your thesis in a lot of ways, or your PhD work. But what was it about this one that finally made you decide that you needed one for yourself?
I'd wanted one for ages. It was just affording one and finding one at the right time and trying to get them complete as well. So a lot of them have ended up in a really bad state over the years. So dials aren't original, they've lost their case. So I just saw this one, right time, right moment, all original, even got the original chain that you just saw with it too. And I was like, yes, this is my time. And Tarts is one of the really famous names as well, which it's also quite a comical name. So,
Where'd you find it from?
so it was an auction house in the UK.
Oh, cool.
I just think you said that's Dutch style. What's that mean? What's that? I don't know what that is. So sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. The aesthetic Dutch style of that era was very different to the English or Swiss styles. So you've got the movement layout. In English watches, we used to have a single-footed balanced cock, whereas in the Dutch style, you have this double-footed balanced bridge with very wide feet. The French style was it was a bridge, but it was a larger plate with two tiny little feet. So this was aesthetically Dutch in that respect, and also the arcading on the minute track. So there's a little scallop around each hour. And that was really popular on Dutch clocks at the time. So it's seen as it's called the Dutch arch style, was the traditional name for it. But it's not Swiss and it's not English.
So it was a Swiss watch copying an English watch pretending to be a Dutch watch?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and that it made no sense to me either, which is like, I have to get the answers to this question. Yeah.
Rebecca, can you talk a little bit more about the Dutch forgeries for just a second? I don't want you to condense all of your work or all of your HSNY talk or whatever into a few minutes here, but can you just talk a little bit about them and then maybe tell people where they can go and find you to learn more about all the work you've done in the space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my PhD is online, and the HSNY talks online as well. So if anyone's interested in that, but it's I was working at an auction house in Birmingham not long after I graduated, and I came across one of these watches, a pocket watch, late 18th century, that had this one was signed Wilter London, but the style was different, and I didn't really think much of it at the time until I looked it up in Loom's Dictionary of Watch and Clockmakers. And it just came up with the name Wilter John, perhaps a fictitious name. And that was it on it. I was like, right, okay. And this is when I looked them up a bit more and found they're related to something called a Dutch forgery, but that it was thought that these forgeries were made in Switzerland, although they're using London names and in a Dutch style. And that was it. That was all I could find out about the subject. I was like, none of this makes sense to me. And 13 years later, and a thesis on the subject, just studying how, tracing these watches back through sort of 250 years time across Europe, smuggling, strapping watches to dogs and sending them across the Swiss border, all sorts of like ships and wreckages and smuggled cargo. And yes, fascinating subject, but how Dutch merchants basically led the trade in picking up watches from the areas of Switzerland now that are iconic for watchmaking, and how the start of their industry kind of elevated out of there, really. So yeah, long-term consequences.
I will say I've read your book, obviously, and I wrote about it a year or so ago on Hodinkee. You can find that. It'll be in the show notes and all that type of good stuff. But you have a good section in there that kind of summarizes a lot of the work you've done in there as well, which is one of the places I'd recommend if you want to discover more in the space. I want to move on from there, and people are probably wondering why Rebecca and Lewis are even on this podcast together. So maybe we'll start there and then we can work backwards. And maybe you can explain sort of the work you all have done together, and even before that, how you all came to know each other.
Yeah, sure. Lewis, I think you contacted us first, didn't you?
I think I trying to remember this as well. I think when we launched, I did a kind of saying hello to everyone in the kind of local scene of watchmaking and just said hello, do you want to be friends, kind of thing. And some people stayed, said hello back. And in fact, everyone's very nice. But I mean, you and Craig were, I think, because we had shared. I say shared. You knew what you were doing, and we didn't. So I had lots of questions for you.
I still don't know if you know what we're doing. But
so that's So we got in touch. But anyway, back to you.
Yeah, I think because we were doing enamel dials as well at the time, or trying to, and not getting them to where we needed to be, and kind of you were doing them and getting them to where we wanted to get them. Only we were doing like the metal floating in the enamel kind of effect that you've been trying to do something similar, but it hadn't been working. And we just got chatting out of that, I think, really, of kind of trying to.
It was COVID. I remember talking to you in the garden. You weren't in the garden, but I remember sitting in my garden talking to you, and it being very like a lovely conversation, because I'd seen your Champlevé prototype, like attempts on Instagram, and it was really similar to what we were trying to do at the same time. So it seemed sensible to kind of see if we could do it together.
Well, Lewis, that kind of hints at where you guys went from after the introduction, after the cold email, it sounds like, from Lewis, where it all went from there, and you contributing enamel or enamel work and collaborating on the dials that would go on to some of Rebecca's project 248. So maybe you just pick up the story there a little bit.
So because I'm not an enameler, but we'd come to Champlevé. So Champlevé is a technique where the metal sticks up. So instead of printing on it, if you looked at something, it would be the metal coming through the enamel instead of or as well as the print on the dial surface. And the enamelers had made a watch because it was the 10th anniversary of my wife and I a few years ago, and I'd left a little bit late to get anything. So I tried to make a watch, but it was too late to make a printing plate because it was I think it was like 1 or 2 days before. So instead of printing, we kind of cut out. So put like 11 dashes for hour markers. Then on the 10, you had a number 10, but kind of cut them out of the metal and filled in everything else. So you just saw 11 dashes and a 10. And it was a little rough and ready, but when you kind of wore it, when she wore it, it really kind of caught the eye because it was the silver, was the metal that was coming through. So on one light, it would look very kind of simple and plain. And then another light, it would really kind of draw your eye. And so I think it was over Christmas, she started wearing this, and I was just kept catching my eye, and I thought we should do this, like look into this. And then the enamelist told me it was cold because I hadn't realized then. And that was it. And then I think about a year or so later, there was Rebecca and Craig been working on the same thing. But what was quite interesting, I thought, is that chat when we kind of first started talking about it, like those machines or tools behind Rebecca that's actually how those guys work, isn't it? They're not kind of display, and we'd been approaching it with quite with cold forging, so trying to stamp it out rather than to make the raised bits, so the indexes, and you guys have been using quite a high-tech method, which was completely like the other way around from what I'd expected. And I think if we'd kept going with cold forging and stamping, we would still be trying it now. So it really was a proper kind of collaborating on that, because we took their idea of how to do it and then did it over a long period of time.
Did we introduce you to our clipping tool maker as well?
You did. That was before, actually. Yeah, no, that was that's been fantastic, because we were stuck. I think that's how we first started talking properly, because we were stuck trying to work out how to make the Fumé dials when we kind of came across that method of, well, it wasn't a method at the time, of a warp dial that was lighter in the middle because the metal had buckled. We were like, if we can replicate this in a controlled way. And so we were going around all the different like CNC people that we could find on Google, and no one was up for it. And then you put us in touch, and then we've been working with them ever since.
Cool.
Yeah.
Lewis, can you talk about this for just a second? I think I've heard you tell the story of Fumé Enamel and how you guys kind of discovered that process. You kind of discovered it by accident and then went about figuring out how to make the process actually standardized and replicable.
Fit in a watch, yeah. That was
yeah.
So we've been, all of our enameling up to the first couple of years have been on copper. So you can enamel on a few different metals: copper, silver, gold, high carbon steel, gilding metal, and there's a couple, but there aren't that many. So we were using copper with opaque enamels, and then we started experimenting with silver as a base. And one of the experiments was with silver with transparent enamel, and the heat of the kiln had warped this dial, and so there was a lot less enamel in the middle where it buckled, and a lot more on the outside. So you had this lovely gradient of kind of blue to went light blue to dark blue, and we thought, well, this looks really nice. And obviously, Fumés had been around for ages, but it hadn't been done. This was a different way of doing them and doing them in enamel. So we wanted to replicate a dial which was thicker in the middle and thinner on the outsides, and flat all the way around the bottom. So it still has to be perfectly flat underneath to fit in the case. So you have this little mountain of metal, and then you put enamel over the top, and it's thick on the edges and thinner in the middle, then thick to the edge. And it's a very simple idea. But getting someone to form a piece of silver like that was the first challenge, is where I got in touch with Rebecca.
Rebecca, we've been talking about the enamel work and the dial work that went into all of this and how you all became connected with each other. But I think if my understanding is correct, this all came out of what you call Project 248, which is a much bigger endeavor that you and your husband Craig obviously have been working on for quite some time. The culmination of a lot of your work as a watchmaker and restorer. So I don't want that story to get lost in the enamel work, which is obviously very important as well. But maybe you could just talk about that project a little bit and tell people even what it even was and why it deserved such splendid enamel work, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, 248 was our kind of in many ways, we call it our school watch. So Craig and I trained as restorers. That was our kind of main line of work. And you get to a point as a restorer where you realize that you've made pretty much every component for someone else's watch. And how about, let's give it a go making every part for our own watch. So 248 was our first completely in-house movement that we made using all these old machines behind me. And the 248 stands for 2 watchmakers, 4 hands, and a traditional 8mm lathe, which I think is one of those there. So you have several of those. So there's technically several 8s. But yeah, that was a huge, huge project. We had no idea when we went into it quite how much we were taking on. It's incredible because it's just a time-only manual wind watch, but when you're making every single component down to every last screw yourself from scratch, every last balance weight, everything, it's incredible how many parts even just go into a basic manual wind watch, let alone making it on, I mean, our oldest machines are about 1900, so over 120 years old. And some of our hand tools are 19th century as well. So proper old school methods. But that's why we wanted to do something really traditional with our approaches. As restorers, we kind of cherry pick from the last 150 or so, actually 200 or so years of watchmaking to pick our favorite designs, styles, developments. I mean, it's got a Breguet parachute shock setting, a proper functioning one. We use German silver from the plates because we love South German watchmaking. The engraver we work with is in Germany as well. The style of the balance and weights were taken from George Daniel's Watchmaking. It's an English lever escapement, which haven't been commercially made in the UK for over a century. So we kind of like picking these different things to kind of, in our mind, of where could the English industry be now if it hadn't kind of tailed off at the end of the 19th century, and put it into one watch. And enamel obviously is such a traditional style of English watch styles. If you go back to second half of the 18th and 19th century, we used to make a lot of them, but that fizzles out completely. And I think before this, we're huge fans of AnOrdain's work anyway. And I think a lot of that is that the industry was pretty much commercially extinct before them, and they brought it back from nothing, which is just a huge achievement. Not only in terms of the skill and the crafts, but also in what it demonstrates, that you can run a really successful business out of a traditional craft, which feels almost impossible, but there they are doing it, growing. And they're such a young team as well. So again, this idea of traditional crafts are kind of this aging market, little old men hunched over machines and lathes and things.
Come on, Lewis isn't that old.
I know, and you're meant to be talking about your watch as well, Rebecca. Just gone back to be nice about ours.
Well, before we get back to AnOrdain and both of you, I wanted to ask Rebecca, obviously, developing the enamel dial was surely just one of the challenges you encountered in developing the watch, but the movement specifically. So I'm wondering if you could just choose maybe one specific component and maybe one of the more difficult ones, why it was so difficult, and then sort of how you were able to solve for developing that specific component.
Yeah, I mean, one we spoke about recently on Instagram was making a barrel, just a mainspring barrel in a watch, because you don't realize the amount of dimensions, and it's not, you've got components working inside components that have to work inside another component. And when you're not using CNC, you're just using old machines. You've got traditional kind of measuring tools. You've got nothing. Yeah, there was no CNC in the first 248 whatsoever. Um, it's a lot more than you'd think, because it's quite a big thing within a watch, but there's so much more like there are more measurements and dimensions to think about in a mainspring barrel than there is in a balance staff, which is a fraction of the size, but a lot more straightforward. So it's things like that that took us by surprise, because we thought, oh, that would be the easy bit and the balance is going to be the hard bit. No, other way around. And even just turning them, because they're all hand turned as well. So if you make a mistake, you've got sort of over 10 processes that go into making it. And if you make a mistake at process 10, you're back to 1 again and have to start again from scratch. So there was a lot of, it was a huge, huge learning curve. I mean, to be honest, everything was a bit of a challenge in one way or another, but we got there.
I have a memory from this. At the end of this process, I was just before launch, I called to see Rebecca and Craig to see how it's going, and you were both in a state of panic. I think it's fair to say, but holding it together just about. But it turns out, and I kind of, maybe correct me if I've got this one wrong, but you had got a photographer who wasn't used to photographing watches to do the launch shots, and then after he'd done the shots, Craig had melted the case back down because he wasn't quite happy with it, to start again. And then the photographs came back and they were rubbish. So they had a watch, or they didn't have a watch, and they didn't have any photographs, and they were going to launch like 2 days later. But I think that I'd always kind of, obviously a very stressful moment for you guys, but it made me just a lovely thing, because how many people do you know who melt their cases down because they're not quite happy with them and then start again? It's just, it was in hindsight, it was a nice story, I thought, but obviously not something you want to
at the time for us.
No, I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be right at the end of the day, because obviously watches like that come with a price point too, and it's got to be right. So if we're not happy with it, we will start again, and that takes time. But luckily, our clients are very patient with us. Touch wood. But Lewis, I think you've pretty much summarized the last 12 years of our company there, with the whole in a state of panic but holding it together.
It's the kind of perfectionism and skill as well that I was more going, rather than the stress and the panic. But it all goes together, doesn't it?
Rebecca mentioned something that I want to get into a little bit with both of you. And I think, Lewis, it kind of dates back to even when and why you founded AnOrdain, which was in what, like 2015?
Yeah, slowly, a bit before that, but yeah.
Maybe if you could just talk about that time and sort of the impetus and the motivation for you founding the company, because I think it gets to some of what Rebecca's speaking to about wanting to build things around you, first of all, and then using craftsmen and craftswomen that you know around you and the tradespeople around you. So if you could just talk about the original motivation and how it's sort of inspired the way you've built AnOrdain over the past decade.
Yeah, I mean, I'd had an idea of making watches for years before I knew anything about watches or was interested in them, just because I thought this could have the right ingredients for being an interesting way to spend your time, design, engineering, and living somewhere that's interesting. But it was when, I'd started a company making audio products out of art college, and it got fairly big, and we were designing things in the UK, but everything's getting made in China. And this got just very frustrating for me, because you would get excited about an idea about a design, and then you'd send it off, and then the next day you'd get a reply from the factory saying, no, it's not possible, kind of thing. And you'd always have this language and a time barrier. So AnOrdain really started as a kind of therapeutic thing, I suppose, to give me an outlet to do something that was all under one roof, that you could have the people designing and the people making either being the same people or being in the same space, and you see what's happening and what goes wrong, and it's a very closed sort of loop in that respect. So it's just that was really the idea for starting. So there was Adam, our first enameler, was sitting there in the studio for 3 years, pretty much just plodding away, trying to work out to make enamel dials. And there was no kind of commercial plan behind it. It was just, I was in a position that my work was going fairly well in my other company, and I was able to fund that. And then it got, the old company got more and more frustrating, and the new one more and more appealing. So it sort of jumped. And I really had no idea anyone was going to, because at the time, if you don't, it's an awful lot of money for a watch, £1,000 to I was, by that time I'd left the old company. I was running out of money fairly quickly and thinking, God, is anyone actually going to buy these things? But it was, there was a bit of panic at that stage. But it was, yeah, it's always been just interesting to do, and that's what keeps you doing it, I think.
It seems as though you've built the company. Obviously, enamelers, I would imagine, are a large part of your workforce, but also it seems as though you hire a lot of designers, artists from local sort of art and design schools, and it seems as though that really impacts just like the product and the aesthetic of the company. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, I mean, we have amazing art colleges in in this country and in lots of places, but what's weird is you get incredibly talented, passionate people going through art school educations and then working in coffee shops or working in something completely unrelated to art, and to be able to work those people in a kind of field that's semi-related, it results in, I think, a quite nice atmosphere, and just people feel like they're making something they enjoy doing, which is good. Because Rebecca, you and Craig went to art college, didn't you? What are you saying?
Did, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
they couldn't get rid of me. But we did. So we actually studied the British Horological Institute course, is how we got into watchmaking, which is
the
a
evening one, like the not evening
full-time
one.
course. No, it's
Oh,
full-time.
it's full time, was it? Right.
Yeah, you can't do it full-time now. But I
Mm.
did jewelry and silversmithing for 2 years and then switched over to watchmaking for another 3 years. Yeah.
Can you
So
just
Yeah.
talk about that, finding watchmaking from starting in jewelry, silversmithing, and that type of stuff, and finding watchmaking and the attraction and all of that type of stuff?
yeah, I mean, a lot of it was accidental. So I've always loved science and I love art, and that's me from childhood. But at school, you're not really taught about the disciplines that link the two. You're taught them as very different subjects, and you can be a successful scientist or a dreaming artist. And there's not really a way to bring it together, which, of course, in the real world is the absolute opposite. There's so many different careers that combine the two. But I ended up doing all sciences for my A levels at high school, and dropped out because I hated it. Ran away to art school purely because I was an air cadet at the time. So I was planning on joining the army at one point. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, one of the cadet leaders was a jeweler, and I was like, "Oh, you've got a school of jewelry down the road. Why don't you go and check it out?" And I did, and I just love the space. I love the atmosphere. I love the making and the smells and the sight and just the light and everything. It just felt so active. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this. So I signed up to a national diploma course, left school, went off and did that for 2 years, which was fantastic, really hands-on, kind of proper foundation skills of saw piercing, filing, drilling, just the skills that you really need to make stuff. And it was through that I discovered there was also a watchmaking course at the same campus. And before that, yeah, I didn't realize it was a career. I never heard of it. And a couple of the students on the watchmaking course saw my work in a show when I was doing kind of basic articulated and automata pieces. And they were like, "Oh, Rebecca, you look like you might find watchmaking interesting. Why don't you have a look round?" And they showed me around the workshop, and I was just like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. This is what I want to do. And that was it. Finished the jewelry course, went on to watchmaking, and that's been it ever since. And one of those students was Craig, who found me, who was already in his first year. So, yeah.
Rebecca, you mentioned it, working with other craftspeople around your country and even around the world more broadly. In fact, I guess it's kind of how you all came to even know each other and then work together. But you all obviously both have careers and businesses now that are centered around craftspeople and tradespeople and all of those types of things. But I'm wondering if you could just sort of speak about the importance of that to you, number one, and why you think it's sort of unimportant thing, and then also just the importance of like collaborating with these types of craftspeople and tradespeople that are sort of really good at what they do.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose for me and Craig, it really is just the two of us and our dog Archie, of course, in the workshop. So collaborating for us is a really important part of the process, because for that moment with that project, our team of just us expands to a whole group of people, all contributing their own skills, each of whom have spent their lifetimes dedicating to excellence in whatever their chosen field is. That, we would never be the engravers or enamelers that, I mean, On AnOrdain would never compete with them on enameling. We just can't. We're watchmakers. So collaboration really is the only way for a small business to work at the very highest level possible. And it's a joy. We really love working with creative people. Like you end up being so much more innovative and creative for having those discussions and conversations, and even just keeping an open dialogue between other workshops and what we're working on, what our challenges are, and seeing how we can feed into each other and help each other out is it's a lovely way to work.
It's kind of the historical roots of watchmaking in the watch industry as well, right? I mean, before the whole trend towards in-house everything of the past 20 or 30 years, this is kind of how it went, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's the history of the industry, particularly the British side of things, which is why I find the whole in-house thing, I call it the George Daniels effect. There was never the whole like in-house British watchmaking thing before Daniels, and now it's like the epitome of watchmaking. But because you had the industries, if you go back to the 19th century, you had the American industry, which was very much standardized mass manufacture. You had the British industry, which was still cottage industries making very small numbers of watches in comparison, still making a few thousand watches a year at peak production. And then you had the Swiss came in and managed to combine that luxury marketing with the American mass manufacturing to become the industry today. So collaboration was everything. Like areas like Clerkenwell and Hatton Garden and the jewelry quarter we used to be based in were these little collectives of makers. Sorry, Lewis, I think I cut you off there.
No, not at all. I was just thinking there is still a lot of, I mean, the Swiss industry is still a lot of, separate trades. You still have dial makers and hand makers. And I think it maybe gets put out that it's people like to make everything look more in-house than it is. But apart from
that's certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah, the people still do that. It just sounds, you see a lot of in-house dials made in certain factories that obviously are, but it's just a lot of it is marketing. But it's good, like you were saying earlier. It's you do what you're good at and you stick to that. And I think it's just a fairly good way of approaching things.
Can you talk about the state of watchmaking in the UK and then what it means to you, if anything, to sort of be based there in a or in an industry that is more sort of focused on Switzerland and Swiss watchmaking?
I got told off for being rude about other watch companies before, so I'm just going to say positive things about
Lewis. If I may say though, Lewis, quickly before you answer, I reached out to you years ago to do an article about dial making or whatever it was, and obviously you're one of the first people to reach out to. And one of the things that charmed me about you is how candid you were about what other people were doing, and that's why, all these years later, that's why we're here now. So, please proceed. Please proceed with that in mind.
It's no, I thought so. What was the question? Was British watch? Yeah, there's lots of good people doing good things now. Lots of good people who might.
Oh, come on, Lewis.
Yeah, no, I think well, Rebecca and I were involved with the BHI recently, weren't we, in a kind of how to progress in
BHI is British Horological Institute.
Sorry, yeah, it is the BHI and the Heritage Crafts Trust. So they're looking at how you can kind of have a future for the watch industry, and one of the observations is everything's fairly separate. I mean, it's a small world here, but you've got that, and then you've got other organizations, and it seems like there's perhaps working together. It's got to be one of the aims to get things going. But there are some, like, obviously these guys, there's Frodsham, Garrick, they're all genuinely making watches and doing some watchmaking, which is good. And I think that's what it comes down to at the end, is training people, getting expertise in the country. And there might be a lot of people who are, doing more marketing and sales than making watches. But there are also people making watches coming out of that. Yeah. So that wasn't very, very coherent, was it? Rebecca, what do you think?
It's gracefully answered, though. I have no idea who's.
Yeah, you should run for office. So it's quite political, Lewis. Wow.
We've got an election coming up, Lewis. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've never been, as a company, this kind of brand British. Everything's got to be British. We're really open about wanting to work with the best craftspeople wherever they're based, which again is quite a traditional approach. If you look back at sort of even going back to the 17th, 16th, 17th century, you'd work with lapidary stonecutters in Antwerp, you'd work with enamelers in Switzerland and France, and that was just the way the industry was, and there was no issue with it. So yeah, I mean, one of our engravers is in Germany, and one of our strap manufacturers is in France, and then we've got an enamel painter we just started working with in China. And for us, it's about finding the best people at their crafts rather than being, but that's
I think I'm completely on the same page with that. And I want to say before, actually, one of the lovely things about doing the 2 for 8 dial for you is that I think a lot of people would have taken the view that, we sell watches for X amount and they're very exclusive, and you sell watches a lot cheaper, and therefore we wouldn't want to be associated with you. But for you and Craig, it's very much about, the making and the craft and what, the product, which I think is it's a good way of doing it.
I think that's something our industry could benefit more from, is moving away from trying to be in-house with everything, because it's really, unless you're the scale of companies like Rolex and Patek, how do you really make things realistically and economically in-house completely? It's virtually impossible. So I think celebrating that collaborative approach more, and instead of trying to say you've done everything yourself, looking for people to work with and supporting other small manufacturers. Like, there's so much we would benefit from in the UK. Like, we would love to work with a case maker. At the moment, we make all our own cases in-house, but we would love to find, actually, it's a call to action. Any goldsmiths, silversmiths, or people working in allied trades who'd like to get into that, we'd love to collaborate with someone else, because it allows us then to focus more on the watchmaking, which is the bit we really love doing. And yeah, having enamelers like On AnOrdain has been just a miracle, really, because 20 years ago we wouldn't have been able to do that. The skills didn't exist here. So that's fantastic. And yeah, small engineers, precision engineers, those are the sort of companies that we really, really could do with. And we need to talk about them and shout about them and celebrate how invaluable they are to us, I think, to encourage more people to pursue subjects like that.
We mentioned we've been talking a little bit about the benefits of in-house versus collaboration, and I'm curious if this is a bit of a consumer education issue, or maybe even if the tide has changed a little bit, because over the past few decades or however long it's been, there's been this narrative that in-house is good and it means better and all of these types of things. But it seems as though consumers have become more educated, and they've perhaps turned a little bit and learned to view that word, or perhaps just any marketing that a big brand does, with more skepticism. So I'm wondering if there's anything there, if you all have felt that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've been our own company for 12 years, making watches for 10. And certainly our clients love the collaborative approach, because I think they like the idea that they're investing not just in a watch, but in a watch that is supporting this whole little economy of watchmakers. So it's not just about kind of getting a nice thing at the end of it. They also know that there's a whole group of people now that are able to practice their craft doing what they do because of the investment of people like our clients. And we share, like, we have a monthly mailing list that just goes out to our clients, past, present, and future, where they see some of the people that we work with, and we share their stories. And sometimes they end up in direct contact with them and commissioning them for things like Method Studio, who I know On AnOrdain have worked with as well, but we've had clients commissioning them for work after introductions through us. So it's kind of part of this little family, I suppose. And yeah, our clients seem to really like that. I don't know if that would have been the same kind of 20 or 30 years ago, but certainly now that feels like that's the case.
I think there's a big, that space of time, there's been a lot of education of customers, which is so they understand the value in certain things, whereas before it felt like it was a lot more brand driven. So if they understand what goes into work, then they can they understand why it's good value or not. So I think that's really helped.
Lewis, I want to stay with you for just a minute, because we caught up towards the end of last year and we talked about a number of things. One of which was the fact that you were opening a new all-in-one sort of studio, workshop, whatever you want to call it, in Glasgow. And then you were planning, alongside that, perhaps you were planning to sort of reopen your order book, which, extends at least a few years into the future. And I know earlier this year you opened that back up, and then obviously the Model 3 has come out and has been a success for you. So I'm wondering if you could pick up on any of those threads in the way you want, but just sort of give us an update on what's been going on at AnOrdain, because I know it's been sort of a busy time for you all.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've not launched an awful lot over the past couple of years, and I think one of the issues we've had is being a little bit too um, like trying to do things which are really difficult, and then you end up with nothing coming out of it at the end. So we've been very busy with development projects, um, and so it's been fairly quiet on the output front, I think. But we've got a fair bit over the next 2 years, which are looking really interesting. One of the things actually is porcelain, which we'd started looking at about 18 months ago, because it's visually fairly similar to enamel, but it's made in a completely different way. You can kind of pour it or cast it or form it, so it has lots of different properties. So that's something that we've been putting a lot of time into as a future product line. There's some movement projects which have kind of come out, and I think what you were mentioning earlier about people's view on in-house changing. I think a few years ago it was a case that in-house was better and off the shelf was worse. It was that kind of black and white. But I think people are starting to understand that things like servicing and reliability that you get with having made hundreds of thousands of movements is really important. So our our kind of work on movements for the past couple of years has been based on using kind of huge cliche would be workhorse bases and kind of making them beautiful. So you've got the kind of reliability and the value that you get from off the shelf with the aesthetics that come from something more kind of sort of bespoke. So that stuff will be coming up.
Both of you have this interesting, not a problem necessarily, but a situation where you're constricted on supply sort of naturally because of the handmade or human touch that goes into all of your products, which means that sort of demand outstrips supply that you can reasonably make. So I want to ask both of you this question, but I'll start with Rebecca and sort of just talk about the challenges or the opportunities, depending on how you want to look at it, of something like that, and how you even think about allocating or distributing your watches when you're making so few of them for all of the reasons we've kind of been talking about.
Yeah, I think there are no problems, only challenges, is the saying, isn't it? So we operate a build book system and reserve build slots, which actually closed at the moment now. So we got to 10 years ahead and we're like, right, okay. That's plenty long enough.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can only produce sort of 3 to 4 watches a year, typically. One of the in-house. But I think we'd like to collaborate with other companies where that kind of really takes off, and that would allow us to make more pieces. The really kind of handcrafted stuff, obviously, you're always going to be limited because it just takes so long to make, and with only 2 watchmakers, we already do more than we should do. So it is tricky, but I think kind of managing build book systems is a really good way of doing it. And we've got a reservation, kind of a list for people waiting on any cancellations and stuff. And beyond that, I think the biggest challenge for us is kind of maintaining awareness that we're still going in the middle of all of this, because we've got no stock. We don't have time to make stock. So we've got nothing we can exhibit. We get asked to participate in events and fairs and all the rest of it. And it's like, well, I'd love to, but we've got nothing we can show you because the watch is finished and it's out the door. And in the meantime, obviously, you've got to think about the long-term value of your watches, because even though we won't see the potential of that, our clients will. And we're not completely naive. Like, clients do want to see some long-term investment potential out of their watch. So if we just thought, right, 10-year build book, order books closed, we're just going to get our heads down and work, and we're not going to do any kind of PR or marketing or put ourselves out there in any way, then no one's going to know we're still going. You kind of need to occasionally come up and say, hi, we're still here. So that's a challenge of how to do that. But that's things like the book and social media and stuff's been really helpful to keep kind of the message out there that we're still doing things, sharing our processes, supporting other watchmakers as well. I get so many messages on social media from young watchmakers wanting to do similar things and asking for advice all over the world as well, like where we get materials from, who we work with, things like that, and just sharing everything. Yeah.
Lewis, it's a similar problem for you in the sense that your order book was closed for quite some time. I think you opened it back up towards the beginning of this year, and perhaps it's still open now. But maybe you can talk sort of
Yeah, no,
similarly about how you manage that.
So it's permanently open now. I think we realized
Okay.
that's the best thing to do. I think we were worried about working at the time 3 or 4 years ahead, not just being able to guarantee that certain things be available and whatnot. We didn't want to be taking deposits on stuff we couldn't make. But I think, that was perhaps being overly cautious. And, it's always been a kind of first come, first served model. And that seems it seems the fairest way of doing it. I think if you want a build slot, so it's done on time rather than a product. So you don't choose a watch, you choose a build slot. So if something else has come out, then you can choose that then. But we don't. And I think when people get used to that, everyone seems fairly happy with it. We did. See, we've never. There's been one queue jumper that we've allowed, and that was it was a university in America who wanted to buy a watch for a Nobel Prize winner from somewhere. But I shouldn't say that. That's probably they'd won a Nobel Prize and they were from here. And we thought, well, if you can't let them jump the queue, then who can you? But apart from that, it's like, it's special, because you'll be fair.
So to everyone out there, just win a Nobel Prize and then you'll get your AnOrdain.
If you're from Glasgow, and if you can win one, otherwise you're not getting one.
Go, yeah.
But it was you get a lot of people saying, I could buy 3, and would you let me get them quicker or stuff like that? But it's just simple rules. So.
Rebecca, you said something there that I wanted to have you expand on just a little bit, sort of about encouraging young watchmakers, potential watchmakers. Something we hear about in the US, and I assume it's the same in the UK, is just the lack of watchmakers, or how there's a real sort of there's not a lot of them around and not a lot of people are training in that space. So I'm wondering what advice you give to folks in that space that maybe are pursuing that path or are thinking about it.
It's a huge challenge, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry is that massive skills gap. So you've got opportunities to qualify as a watch technician, and courses to help you get a good foundation level of skills in the UK. And we're fine in that respect. But to elevate from being a technician to being a master watchmaker, there's this huge gap. And when it used to take sort of 7 to 10 years to train a master watchmaker from scratch, and you've got courses and the degrees in the UK that lasts anywhere between a year and 3 years, it's just not enough. And then, the space in the middle, when you've got a lot of them will end up working for the big brands and companies who have no vested interest in making master watchmakers. They want service technicians, so they're not training them. There are no other schools and courses you can go to get those higher level qualifications. At the same time, you've got a few charities in the middle, like the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust in the UK will fund specific training. So if you've already qualified, you already have foundation skills, but you want to elevate your craft in some way. Places like WASTEP, the school in Switzerland, offer short courses on turning and things like that. So you can apply for funding to go over to Switzerland and spend a few weeks training at WASTEP and bring those skills back home again. So there are opportunities like that. But it is, it's a tricky one, especially because the master watchmakers that there are tend to be quite small companies, and it's really hard to train someone because it's a lot of time and a lot of energy. But I mean, they're having the same problem in Switzerland. I mean, they are lacking kind of finishers and everything from people who can make gongs for repeaters, those really specialist niche skills. They are rare creatures, and hopefully I think brands will get to the stage where they think, okay, maybe we do need to invest a bit more, and that might involve them perhaps supporting other companies if they can train and take on people in-house. It'd be lovely to have that kind of recognition that we all need these skills, really, and what's affecting us, it's still going to be affecting bigger companies. So
Yeah, we've found, I think on the upside, I would say that the most popular job that we've posted is an apprentice watchmaker, and that's out of like every, photography, web design, enameling, every job. And I think there was 150 applicants for this job
Wow.
a couple of months ago. So I think that was really, and most of them were kind of young. I'd say more female than male, mostly an awful lot of jewelers as well. And that's who we ended up hiring. Actually, was a very good jeweler who started today. And there's a couple more that we want to take on, but I don't think it's for a lack of there's interest, and I think if anything, there's more interest in watchmaking from a kind of an entry point of view than was a few years ago, because people see it as I think people see it as a kind of respite from the like screens and technology and everything. It's quite
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, but that also summarizes the problem. We've got the interest, but the opportunity is what's lacking. If you had all those applicants, it would be lovely for them all to get an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're hoping to take on a couple more, but I think the reason we're hiring is because the watchmaker we trained for the past 4 years got poached by one of the big ADs, and like you spend all the time training them, and they offer them $5,000 more and the promise of working on Patek and whatever, and they're off. So you've got to start again. So it's a tricky one, and I think one of the approaches, because that's the second time it's happened as well. So I think we're kind of separating it more into assembly and watchmaking, and giving the watchmakers more interesting projects and the assembly people more of a part-time thing, like, so that's part of their broader working week, so they can be doing jewelry the rest of the time or whatever they want to do, and that seems to be really appealing for people.
Since we're talking about watchmaking, this is a bit of a shift, but I wanted to ask Rebecca just a few really specific weird questions about being a watchmaker. I think the first one is, from your perspective, what makes a good watch? Or from a watchmaker's perspective, what even makes a good watch?
And for us, I suppose as restorers, it's the serviceability of it, how easy it is to take it apart, fix it, put it back together, to make new parts for it as well. So, I mean, obviously with things like 3D printing, we'll probably be in a very different position in sort of 10, 20 years time from now in terms of what parts we can make. But like you see a big shift in restoration from you really kind of machine made pieces from up until sort of the 1960s, when plastics and things start sneaking into even mechanical movements. And with those, you have to find a replacement component, or you can't make a replacement plastic thing very easily at that scale. Certainly as a small business. And again, I see it with some modern watches, including some incredibly expensive watches, looking at them thinking, God, I don't want to work on that. In like 40 years' time, I am glad I'm not going to be around responsible for maintaining that. For us, it's that kind of, can you repair it? That's the mark of a good watch to me.
What's a good example, Rebecca? Have you got, because you have an Air King, don't you? And Rolex from the 60s are meant to be. Is that right? Or it's just
Yeah, we've got vintage Rolex are great things to work on. Aniga as well. Like 30T2 was a caliber that we used for our first Kingsley series, and we actually discovered this before we started using it. But George Daniels experimented with this coaxial that he retrofitted into a 30T2. It's a proper watchmaker's watch movement. That lovely thing to work on. They just want to run, which is a real treat to work with. Yeah. Value 90 as well. That's what we're using for our next Kingsleys. And that's another fantastic movement used by a lot of great companies for that reason.
One of the things I really like about your book, Hands of Time, I guess this is the plug to go and buy the book. It's less than 300 pages, right? And it's a super breezy read. I read it on vacation. So for those that think a watchmaking book or a book about watches is not an easy breezy read, Rebecca's completely is, and I would totally recommend to sort of go check it out. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is the way in which you take stories of restorations or old vintage and antique watches that have come across your desk, watches that you've personally encountered, and you manage to sort of weave those into the macro level history of watches and watchmaking. I mean, you go all the way back to the sundials and watches, or clocks, I should say, that were running on water and rivers and things like that. But I'm wondering if you could tell us just maybe one of your favorite stories of a restoration or a watch that had sort of a cool story that kind of came across your bench.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wrote that book in my mind. I was thinking of who I want my reader to be with that book. And I was thinking, I want to write this book for all the people who think watches are boring and can't understand why on earth we're into this subject or it has such a big following, to show them exactly why this is such a cool and fascinating subject. I want everyone who reads it to come away from it a full blown watch geek. That was kind of like my idea with it. And yeah, weaving in the stories of some of the incredible pieces that we've had the pleasure of working on over the years was just it's part of the magic, isn't it? We see anything with incredible provenance coming through, and to handle that and think about what that object has seen. If it could tell you stories, what stories would it tell? Out of the book, I mean, one of the incredible pieces I talk about is a Movado Weems that was on the wrist of a gunner who was shot down in his plane during the Second World War after the Dunkirk evacuations. And narrowly, he was the only survivor of the crash, and the watch nearly went missing, and it was found again. And kind of it was passed on through the generations. His son brought it in, and with these incredible stories about how it ended up on a ship with Captain Scott's son was the captain of the ship, and kind of all these incredible, just almost too incredible to be true stories that went with this watch. And he said, like, I don't know if any of this is true. My dad used to brag about it, but I don't know if it was true. So I went away and I researched every detail, and even down to like the crash records, the names of the people on board, that he escaped on the last ship to make it off back to the UK, who was captained by Captain Scott, the son, the only son of the famous explorer Captain Scott. And I was just like, every box was ticked, and just incredible. And being able to confirm that as well for the family, that yeah, so there's more details of that in the book, but it was just one of those goosebumps moments of just wow. And this watch came into us like missing parts, looking like it had been in a plane crash. So yeah, putting that back into a state where they could wear it, and he's leaving it to his children, and kind of you just feel as a watchmaker you get to play a tiny little part in the story of an object that was around before you and will be around for essentially hundreds of years after you're gone. And it's a special thing to be able to do.
Last question for both of you, I suppose. We've talked a little bit about stuff and projects you've done together, but anything you're all talking about doing together now or working on now that you want to share?
I'm going to remind you, actually, Rebecca, because I was thinking before, you're going to teach us case making. I think Craig very kindly.
We need to write up the notes for that. Yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah, he said that 6 months ago.
I know, and we still, because we have no time.
I know.
We have a tendency of going away on holiday to places with no internet or phone signal just so we can do some work without interruption.
It's hard to find these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah, so we need to do something like that. And I'm working on a kids' book at the moment that'll be out next year, and On AnOrdain make an appearance in that. So
I should say that Sally, I mean, all the stuff I've said
Yeah.
that when we worked together, it's all been Sally rather than me, or as it's kind of one of our very good enamelers. So, and she's in the book, isn't she?
She is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be a photo of her or a cartoon version of her. I'm hoping for
That'd
cartoons.
be good.
That's great. Well, I think we're going to leave the discussion there for today. Thank you to Dr. Rebecca Struthers and to Lewis Heath of AnOrdain for joining me again on another episode of Hodinkee Radio. Thanks to Vic Automanelli, our editor, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all again next week.